Hello, this is Dr. Patrick Hu. I'm President and CEO of Moffitt Cancer Center and President of the Society for Immunotherapy of Cancer. We're really pleased today to have Dr. Crystal Mackall, a really good friend of mine and an outstanding expert, international expert in the field. Dr. Mackall is Professor of Pediatrics and Medicine at Stanford University. She is the founding director of the Stanford Center for Cancer Cell Therapy. She has gotten the highest awards at SITC, including the Richard Smalley Memorial Award in Lectureship in 2021. She's internationally recognized for her pioneering work in cancer patients, understanding the thymus, understanding T cells, understanding exhaustion, and most recently for her groundbreaking work in CAR T therapy. So, Crystal, welcome.
Thank you, Patrick. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, let's start off by just getting to know your background a little more. You were born in Ohio. You grew up in Ohio. Tell us a little about that and how did you get interested in science?
Thank you. Absolutely. Not only was I born there, I lived in Ohio till I was 29. And so I have very deep roots and my family remains in Ohio. I was born in a small town near Youngstown, Ohio, to a working class family. My dad was a steel worker. My mother worked in a grocery store until I was in junior high, and then she became the elementary school secretary. But we were small town folk, and I loved science from an early age, and I wanted to be a doctor for as long as I can remember. I look back now and try to think about, was there some event that made that happen? And I really can't pinpoint it, but medicine was always my calling.
Was there a science teacher that really stimulated you, or was it the volcano project? I'm just kidding.
Absolutely. I had a teacher in 7th grade. Her name is Karen Peters, and she was really a tough lady, probably one of the more demanding teachers I'd ever had. And that really motivated me. And then I had another teacher in high school by the name of Dennis Settle, who was one of the smartest guys I ever met. And of course, he taught, calculus and analysis and trig and physics and chemistry. This is a small town now, so people multitasked, but it was just so inspiring to, brainstorm with Dr. Zettel, Mr. Zettel.
Wow. Well, it's incredible how these small town science teachers could have such influence on the world, and here you are, doing great science, saving lives. It's really a tribute to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Teachers don't get enough credit.
So you decided to train in pediatrics and what many people might consider a challenging field, pediatric oncology, where you see young kids with cancer. Tell us about that motivation.
Yeah, that's a bit of an odyssey in a way, because I actually did training, I'm a physician scientist, and I think my career trajectory is a little unusual in that I really was a very, fully trained, experienced clinician before I did any science at all. I didn't start my scientific career until I left Ohio and went to the NIH. But so the decisions during that medical school time, which led me to pediatrics, I really always had this affinity to oncology. I knew I wanted to do cancer medicine, and I didn't know whether I should do adult or pediatric. And in fact, I did internal medicine and pediatrics combined residency and ended up getting boarded in both. And it's funny because you look back at the time, this was the 80s, and medical oncology in the 80s was a very, sad field. Patients were cured of cancer, but they were largely cured by either the surgeons or the radiation oncologists. And most of the patients who came to the medical oncologist, which I would have been, were receiving palliative therapy, or therapy that was very toxic and not very effective. And peds, on the other hand, we were curing lots of children. We were in the midst of a real dramatic improvement in outcomes for children with cancer. And so it was the more vibrant space. If you fast forward now 30 years, it's really remarkable to see how far adult oncology has come. We now have targeted therapeutics. We've got, oral drugs. People can go on and live long lives, either cured of their cancer or with their cancer in the adult arena. And it's really been, I think, a remarkable return on investment for cancer research in the adult oncology arena. Sadly, in pediatrics, we haven't made much progress since the late 80s. We made dramatic progress up to then. We're now curing about 80% of children, but we're curing them with regimens that were designed in the 70s and 80s. So we're still largely relying on toxic chemotherapy. And we know that even those 80% of children who are cured of their cancer, in some ways can't be considered cured because they've traded cancer for other diseases that are the result of these toxic therapies. And then, of course, there are some of these children, the 20%, metastatic disease, some brain tumors, where there's been no progress made. So it's been an interesting trajectory. It's not what I predicted when I went into pediatric oncology, where it was doing so much better than the adult space.
I understand why you went into it. Those therapies, though, were chemotherapy. You went into immunology. So how did that happen?
Yeah. You're going to love this, Patrick, because, of course, Patrick and I met at the NCI, and we were both clearly inspired by Steve Rosenberg. And I remember to this day, in 1984, I was a medical resident in Akron, Ohio, and I read the New England Journal paper that looked at a case series of patients treated with interleukin-2. And there was clear evidence. It was a low rate of activity, but there was clearly activity. And I read that paper and thought, wow, now this is something that, makes sense. It always made sense to me that our body's defense mechanisms should be able to be used to treat cancer. So I got very inspired by Steve Rosenberg's work and made a decision at that point that I wanted to pursue that area. I actually did some work in Akron, Ohio, during my spare time in residency with an immunologist, Su Ling Chen, who was in the path department there. We used to get colon cancers and take them down to the hood and get lymphocytes out of them and study the lymphocytes. But it was really the work out of the surgery branch at the NCI that I think inspired me. And that's why I did my fellowship at the NCI.
I remember you were in the pediatric group, but you were the only immunologist, if I remember there. There are a bunch of molecular biologists with you. So you really survived those dark ages when no one believed in immunology for cancer. Now they do, but they didn't.
Oh, I know. I remember during my interview when one of the senior faculty in the branch, senior investigators, asked me, and I didn't have the best pedigree, and from a research standpoint, I mean, I had mainly done clinical work, and so they were asking, now, why do you want to come to the NIH, and what are you going to work on? And I said, well, I want to do immunotherapy for pediatric cancer. And I remember distinctly them saying to me, that's not a thing, Crystal. That's not a thing. Oh, I said, I'm always fearless, if nothing else.
That's so funny. Well, all great leaders are like that. They launch into things where it isn't a thing, and that's what you did. It did give you some advantage in looking at the thymus early on, because the thymus, as everyone knows, is an organ where T cells go to mature, but it involutes as people become in adulthood. And so you were treating pediatric patients on chemotherapy. I remember you had a really wonderful publication looking at the age and thymic T cell maturation after chemotherapy.
Yeah, that work was so formative for me. First off, my mentor, even though I was very inspired by Steve, he wasn't my primary mentor at NIH. I ended up working with Ron Gress. And, at the time, and even now, you can kind of look at cancer immunotherapists, and in some ways, they can come from two distinct lineages. There's the solid tumor melanoma lineage, which I would say Steve, kind of led or originated. And then there's the bone marrow transplant lineage, where, that group is always quick to say the first evidence that immunotherapy could cure cancer was the graft versus leukemia effect after bone marrow transplant. And Ron was of the bone marrow transplant lineage. And so I wanted to study cancer immunotherapy, and arguably at the time, the graft versus leukemia effect was the most exciting thing happening. So I went to Ron's lab and I said, I want to become a scientist. I basically barely knew how to pick up a pipette, and said, I want to study GVL. And he said, great, Crystal, we're going to do this. But I got to tell you, I have this other project over here that I think is a really, nice project. It's about T cell homeostasis and where new T cells come from. And I said, oh, okay, Ron, but I want to study graft versus leukemia. Oh, I know, Crystal, we're going to do that. And so he kept, kind of stringing me along. And I learned so much from that exercise. The first thing I learned is you got to let yourself be mentored. And I say this to my young people. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how well-read you are, how motivated you are. It's hard for a young investigator to know what the lab can offer the field. And you're always looking for getting a leg up. And anyway, so I really did follow Ron's lead and ended up learning a lot about how Mother Nature manages T cells. And it turned out to be important in its own right for understanding human biology. But it also, again, was relevant in the long run to cancer immunotherapy, because now we routinely give lymphodepleting therapy to provide space and to open up these pathways, this so-called homeostatic expansion pathway. So, some things come full circle, but it really was a fundamental understanding project, not a cancer immunotherapy project when it started.
And it's really come full circle for you, because you're now an incredible mentor, one of the best mentors in the land. And your mentee was one of our first awardees for none other than the Steve Rosenberg Award,
Isn't
which
it?
is
Yeah.
becoming one of the most prestigious awards in science for young people.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the other thing that Ron Gress taught me so well is the culture of science. And it's very different than the culture of medicine. And it is so deeply intertwined with the mentor-mentee relationships. And it just was, for me, completely formative. I ended up spending 6 years in Ron's lab at NIH. And not only did I learn how to, pipette and do experiments, but I came to understand how the scientific community works and how advances are made, and the power of relationships. It's so important that we cultivate these relationships.
It's wonderful. Now, you did a lot of important work in interleukin-7, and we're still applying that work to labs today, just to try to treat more patients with T cell therapy, get proliferation in the body. So do you use those principles still today in your CAR T work?
Yeah, the interleukin-7 story, I worked on interleukin-7, I mean, intensely for over a decade. And I very much believed at the time that we could create a drug. We could make interleukin-7 into a drug that would improve outcomes for patients in a variety of scenarios. And that still may happen. Interleukin-7 is being studied in a variety of settings, a variety of formulations, long-acting and constitutive or regulatory interleukin-7 receptors in cells. And so that still may come to fruition. But I learned a lot from that experience about the challenge of taking observations from the bench and even in the clinic. We gave interleukin-7 to patients, and it was well behaved. It did what it was predicted to do. It increased T cell numbers, it increased repertoire diversity, and it was non-toxic. But we weren't able to commercialize it. We weren't able to turn it into a drug that had commercial value at the time. And again, it still may happen, but this work started in the 90s. And so I think it was a bit of a a prelude to what I have come to understand is bench to bedside is one thing, bench to market is another thing. And the full life cycle of a life-saving drug hasn't been completed until it's bench to market. And I've spent a lot of time since I've gotten to Stanford in trying to understand more about how do we take drugs and therapies that clearly, I'm not saying IL-7 had clear therapeutic benefit, but there are several that have and still don't make it to market. And again, this circles back to pediatric oncology, where some of the lack of progress in the last 30 years is about market failure.
Tell us about your move into studying CAR Ts, as well as your move to Stanford. How long has that been now?
I went 2016. I came in 2016. Yeah, so 6.5, almost 7 years. The CAR T. So, I always like to reminisce. I remember being at a meeting in Regensburg in 1996, and it was the first I had really seen data on T-bodies, they called them at the time. And whomever I was sitting next to, I leaned over and I said, well, that'll never work. Because I thought, oh, come on, this is pie in the sky. You're going to create this, Frankenstein receptor. And it just seemed crazy to me. So I want to make it clear, whatever the progress I've contributed to CAR T, I did not invent the thing. And truth be told, I probably was a naysayer very early on. But, we all get surprised in this business. And in 2010, again, this gets back to Steve Rosenberg's group. Patrick, you know about this case, the patient with lymphoma who received the CD19 28Z CAR that had been engineered by Jim Kuckendorfer, had a lot of disease and it all went away miraculously. And that was on the 3rd floor and I was on the 1st floor. And let me tell you, we all sat up and took notice because CD19 is an important target in children's cancers. And we knew when we saw that this thing could be very important. So I essentially pivoted at that moment and said, we're going to figure out how to use these things for children. And was, just astounded, as I think the whole field was, when we would see kids come in who had been, I remember in particular, a 4-year-old that we treated who had had leukemia almost since birth. I mean, the little boy had been fighting leukemia for years in his young life, and he was, chemotherapy after chemotherapy. He was beat up, and also his immune system was beat up. We enroll him on our CAR-19 trial, and you end up as a PI feeling almost guilty, as if you're giving false hope or you're doing something that's inappropriate. So I had doubts about enrolling him. Wouldn't you know, he develops a severe cytokine release syndrome. His body goes to war with his cancer. And 28 days later, there is no tumor to be seen. I just, CAR T cells were something completely different. And I still believe them to be just remarkable inventions.
Well, you've done an amazing job, and your work has been incredible on CAR Ts. Tell us about the move to Stanford. What prompted you to move after all those years at the NCI? You were there longer than me, and it's quite a different environment coming out of the NCI. What prompted you to go to Stanford?
Yeah, and look, I mean, the NCI, as I said, took this, young person with no scientific experience from, clinical world, and really taught me how to be a scientist, and also gave me the incredible privilege of taking drugs from bench to bedside, which I realized so very, very few places can do with any kind of scale. But by 2016, I knew that CAR T cells and cell therapies for cancer were going to become commercial products. It was, the writing was on the wall. They weren't approved yet, but they were going to move from being boutique therapies available only in an ivory tower or a government research hospital to being something that could be available at, a community hospital where I did my training. And I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to see how cells were going to roll out as therapies, how they would become integrated, and how we take them to the next level. And so Stanford gave me the opportunity for the real world. I mean, yes, okay, it's still an ivory tower, but at least it was not, it really was a place where they had a very large clinical program, but also was able to keep deep scientific roots and amazing synthetic biology. So I think it gave me an opportunity to both accelerate my scientific work and also just be part of, developing in the real world this new class of therapies.
Well, when you gave your award lecture last year, I remember seeing that and just being stunned. Crystal, that was one of the best lectures I've ever seen in my lifetime. You've shown a lot of courage for a lot of things, being one of the first immunotherapists in all pediatric cancers, but you took on with CAR Ts a rare brain tumor in kids, and you got it to work by optimizing every little step. I was just so impressed with that, with your work. So tell us about that work.
Yeah, Patrick, thank you so much. A couple of things to say, and I want to harken back now to another mentor, and that is Phil Pizzo. Now, Phil Pizzo was the chief of the pediatric oncology branch when I began my training there. And for those of you who don't know, Phil was a pioneer in the development of HIV therapies for children. And when I did my training there, we were dealing with many children dying of HIV infection. And he basically took a very bold approach to doing innovative clinical trials in children. And he taught me that if you're dealing with a dread disease for which there is no hope, then you should be bold. And you should, do what the patients want you to do. They want you to take risks. They want you to try to push the envelope. And I think sometimes pediatrics in general tends to be a conservative field. And Phil's mentorship has helped me to call out the places where it's just a dire situation. And so it's all about the patient population you're treating. People talk about the courage, but diffuse midline gliomas basically have those with the H3 mutation. Essentially, none of these children survive. Their patient is diagnosed. You go into the room as a pediatric oncologist, and I've done this, and say, I'm sorry, we're going to give your child radiation, and there's really not anything else that has activity. And so your child will pass within, a year, most likely. And so you look at a disease like that. So you have to start from the disease. And if you understand the natural history of the disease to be that bad, you're willing to take risks, not because you're a cowboy or a cowgirl, because you know that that's what the patient and the patient's family would want you to do. So we didn't do, we were as careful as we could be. We let the mouse model tell us about the risks. But I saw it, and I continue to see it as sort of my obligation to try to go after these big problems and do it in a way that is ethically sound. But there's got to be some risk.
Well, you really optimized every step. Like, you pick your antigen based on the antigen density, you pick the antibody. Now you're doing some great work with why doesn't CAR T cure everybody, and what's the exhaustion of the CAR cells? How do they stop working when they're starting to work? And tell us about that work.
Yeah. So, I've emphasized the remarkable potency of CAR Ts, right? And it's very well illustrated by the high response rates in leukemia. So that's the good news. The bad news is that sometimes that potency works against the cell. And as our first instincts to try to overcome failure in CAR Ts was to make them stronger, make them more potent, give them another co-stimulatory signal. But we kept coming up with, it wasn't really working. And so we stepped back and took a more holistic look at the situation. And what the cells were telling us is they were getting too activated. And we know that Mother Nature has created so many checks and balances in the immune system to prevent too much activation. And so we had to look at the situation and say, if these things are getting too activated, what are the mechanisms that drive dysfunction in that setting, and how can we reverse or prevent them? And so this idea that too much activation is not a good thing because exhaustion or toxicity, et cetera, it's kind of an important realization, I think, in the business. And sometimes you want to make things better by tuning them, by actually tamping down the signal. And so we've learned a lot about tuning and trying to find Goldilocks, or sort of threading the window between too much activity and not enough activity. It's been very eye-opening, but I think it makes sense with our understanding of fundamental immunology.
You've had a number of novel approaches to tune it down. One was to downregulate the receptor and then upregulate it again, downregulate, give it cycling. You've also had small molecules, I think, to tune it down.
Yeah.
What do you think is the major approach to not overstimulating your T cell?
Yeah, I have to tell you, being at Stanford, the number of synthetic biology technologies that are emanating just from the Stanford labs, and of course there are plenty in many other places as well. It seems like a remarkable set of possibilities. I tend to like small molecules because I think, they're easy to administer. I think protein therapeutics are their own, it gets down to commercialization again, and you have to develop a cell and a protein therapeutic. It's a lot, but I'm not sure it really matters how you tune. There are so many options available today. We're about to launch a clinical trial using a synthetic biology platform called SNP. And what SNP does is it uses an antiviral, grazopavir, or an antiviral that inhibits the hepatitis protease. And by inhibiting the protease, you allow the CAR T cell to remain functional. And so what we found is that it's a drug-on system. So in animals, you give the cells, you give the drug, even with continuous cycling of the drug, you give it every day. There's pharmacokinetic cycling, which allows the cells some period of rest. And probably the coolest part of this was we were targeting an antigen that was shared on normal vital tissues and tumor. And when we gave full dose drug, the animals died of toxicity. But if we gave a lower dose drug, we were able to thread the therapeutic window. So I like the idea of using small molecules because they're analog tunable by modifying the dosage. And I'm just excited to see these elegant SynBio platforms get into people. And let's see how they do. I mean, arguably CAR Ts are the first synthetic biology platform to be therapeutically valuable, but they're going to be the first of many. And right now it's all about cancer, but I really believe that as these things become more sophisticated, more tunable, less toxic, we're going to use them in autoimmunity and infectious disease and regenerative medicine. And so this work, I hope, when my career is over, I hope it lives on not only as a cancer drug, but as a drug for other diseases.
Great. You're such a visionary. So project yourself out 10 years. Where are we in medicine now?
In 10 years, we have more CAR Ts available for liquid tumors and some approved for solids. We also have engineered TCRs and TIL therapies, which you have been very involved with, Patrick. So we have, a diverse array of cellular therapies for cancer, but we also have cell therapies for autoimmune disease. We're using nucleic acids as therapeutics, not only messenger RNA, which we've already seen, the miraculous effect with the COVID vaccines, but we are using in vivo delivery of nucleic acids targeted to specific immune cells with SynBio platforms for diseases other than cancer. We're going to see distributed manufacturing. We're going to have some cells that are manufactured in big plants like the commercial model now, but hospitals are also going to be able to deliver these. And this is really important for rare diseases like pediatric cancers. I think there's every reason to think that automation, it's not so difficult to make a CAR T. So we'll see more automation. There will be allogeneic, but I think autologous will still be around. Those are just some of the things.
Beautiful and exciting, Crystal. I really appreciate your coming to the SITC meeting this year to honor this year's award winner, Zelig Eshar, who worked with CAR T. Talk a little about Zelig and what his contribution was to the field.
Yeah, and I mean, it's why I like to tell the story about my own, lack of imagination. The first time I saw the conversation about T-bodies, Zelig had the gift of imagination, and he had the intestinal fortitude to pursue it. But just the idea that, hey, can't we engineer a T cell so it's not MHC restricted and we could use the antibody or another target? Imagination can go so far in science. And without that creative spark, big changes don't happen. And so it's truly sort of priceless. I don't know how you put a value on the creative spark that ends up coming to fruition. And of course, there are 100 creative sparks for every one that actually comes through. But to me, Zelig had just the real intuition to pursue this at a time when synthetic biology wasn't a thing, as far as I know. He turned out to have a really good idea. And I'm just honored to be able to, build on his legacy by trying to make these things work better.
We sure appreciate you coming to Boston. Tell us about your relationship with SITC and what that means to you.
So SITC is, sort of my, I guess what you'd call my home organization, in that it's the immunotherapists organization. And I remember when SITC was first formed, John Wigginton, who a colleague of mine, was the first president. And so, it was a little bit of a small operation at the time. And so it feels like a bit of a homecoming when you come to SITC. You see all your friends and you see how, just manifest right before you, how much the field has grown. So it's a validation of our field, right, Patrick, when we're there and we see so much happening. So obviously we always learn a lot, but there's also this inspirational piece for those of us who have been in this business a while.
Yeah, it really is like coming home to a family because we spent so many years not being believed that the immune system was important in cancer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So talk to the young women today in science class in Ohio. What would you tell them about a career in science?
That's a really good question, Patrick, and something that frankly keeps me up at night, because I try to figure out why. The facts are that the number of women who are interested in science and who matriculate towards scientific careers relatively early in their life, whether you want to say, undergraduate, is generally 50-50. In fact, one can argue, most undergraduate classes now are more female than male. I don't know if in the math and science STEM it may not quite be, but suffice it to say there are a lot of young women who are attracted to science and do well. But the farther along the career path goes, we see increasing attrition of women versus men. And it's I see it with my own eyes. I see very talented women come into my office and tell me, you know what, I love what I'm doing, but a career as a PI is just going to be too much. And I think that we have to, this isn't going to happen. We have to make proactive steps to retain the best and brightest women in academia, in leadership positions. One of the first ways to do that is to put more women in leadership positions. If they see no role models, and this is the same with underrepresented minorities, that if there are no role models for you that look like you in a leadership position, you don't imagine yourself being there, and the leaders don't understand your plight. So I think we need more women and underrepresented folks in leadership positions, but we also have to go out of our way to deal with things like child rearing and having families. It takes time to do that. And it takes time during the period in which, Patrick, the foundation of your scientific career is happening in your 30s. And so we've got to figure out paths that are conducive to having, families. It's a problem, and it's, I think we still need a lot of work to do to solve it.
Absolutely. It's a very important area, and you're such a wonderful role model to everyone in science, including women in science, Crystal. You went from living in Bethesda, Maryland, now to wonderful California. Tell us about that move, and what do you like doing there in California? You've taken up surfing yet, or what do you do there?
Yeah, I'm telling you what, there are people my age out here who surf, and I just shake my head because I can't even imagine. I mean, in my dreams, I'm on a surfboard, but that's it. Look, it's a beautiful part of the country. I find it's easier to stay active out here, enjoying God's great outdoors. It's really pretty remarkable. But that said, a lot of my family and friends are back east, so I always say I still feel like I'm on vacation out here. I don't know that I call it home, but I'm having a great time.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful state. Well, Crystal, thanks so much. Dr. Crystal Mackall from Stanford University, thanks so much. It's an honor to have you at our chat today. You've done so much for the field. You've been such a wonderful role model and mentor to so many people.
And same to you, Patrick, and thank you for your incredible leadership of SITC. It's really great to have you at the helm.